Emily Elizabeth, and I'm the host of the What Fulfills You podcast, a show for and about individuals always seeking to be their best selves. On this show, we talk all about building the mindset, finding the right careers, creating meaningful relationships, and so much more. Welcome to the What Fulfills You podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the What Fulfills You podcast. My name is Emily Elizabeth. I'm your host. And for this week, I'm going to be kicking off a series of solo episodes that are very much tailored towards goal setting, vision setting, and understanding how to go towards the direction that you want to move in, especially for your life, but in particular for this year. So obviously, by the time you're listening to this, this is going to be a little bit towards the end of January if you are listening to this in a more recent time of when this episode is going out. But I think that most of the time we have momentum going into a new year in the early part of the month, right? So early part of January, first 2 weeks, we often have momentum like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the new year, and this is my intention, and so forth. And majority of the time, a lot of people tend to dwindle off towards the end of the month because of maybe lack of precision in the goals or the visions, or not really having the best approach to setting these goals and what the purpose of all of them are. And so I get a lot of questions often around how I created the direction I went in over the past few years, and just overall how I set my goals and my personal visions. And I think how I do it is very personal to me. And so I want to share that because it might not suit everyone, but it also could give you some ideas on what works better for you compared to what other people are doing that try to advise you on, okay, here's how you set goals and whatever, right? So for me, what has always worked, I always start with my personal vision. I've done this for years. I want to say especially since the age of 22 or 23, right when I graduated college and got into my full-time job, and also started the podcast, which was probably like 8 months after I graduated from college. I started this particular podcast. And I think since then, I just wrote down a vision and almost like a curated idea of what that would look like. Especially at the time, it was around the podcast and what fulfills you, and then like my sales job at the time. And so how I tend to look at my vision often surrounds my age. So I remember 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, I was writing about, okay, what my life would look like at the age of 24. I think I was writing this when I was 24. And then what my life would look like when I'm 25, and what it would look like when I'm 26. And I actually recently came across that journal where I wrote this, and I believe I was still in LA at the time. And oddly enough, I don't want to say this with such surprise, because I say with surprise because I didn't end up actually keeping track of it that much, or like that specific journal writing. But it seems as though that it planted the seed, or gave me the ideas of the direction I would want to go in. I wrote about, very whimsical, crazy dreams, very audacious. I was 24 writing about, okay, one day I would have this apartment in New York with this type of view, or just a view, right? And I think I also wrote about one day being able to afford to live between New York and Miami. At the time, I was ready to leave LA. I was very interested in going back to the East Coast. I was interested in perhaps splitting time in the future between New York and Miami, all of that. So I had a lot of that written down in my personal vision. And so, okay, I was like, this is the lifestyle I want to live. That's always how I start with my personal vision, is very surrounding lifestyle. I would also incorporate, okay, what types of workouts would I be doing? How much do those workouts cost? Like very small nitty-gritty details that can feel very weird to write down, because it's almost, I don't know, it can feel like odd, right? When you put the pen to paper and you write down these thoughts. But that's, interestingly enough, what enabled me to actually go in that direction, and why I never felt lost in that process, because I knew that, hey, this is the life I want to live. So what does it take to do that? I preface it with all that because now, at the age of 26, I have done the same thing where I have been starting to write down, what does the rest of 26 look like? What does 27-year-old Emily look like? What does 28-year-old Emily look like? And that's how I would start. Like, those are some of the questions I personally use when it comes to writing down my vision. So I'll go ahead and share my personal examples of my personal vision at this age, right? So again, it's going to vary depending on where you're at in life and also kind of what your priorities are. For me right now, being at the age of 26 and knowing that I am not in any kind of rush to build a family or have children, in the next 4 years or anything. So at this point in my life, I am very focused on the direction of what fulfills you. And I think overall, just like a core career focus, I really want to hone down over the next 2 to 3 years of being able to build what I want to build and take the direction I've taken it in and really amp it up a few notches. I'm also focused on financial trajectory, which is around like how to increase income, how to increase my revenue. And, I think for me, this is not just for the sake of being able to afford better or nicer things, although that comes with the territory, right? I think for me, I think of it in the terms of, number one, not having to worry if so, or as much when it comes to financial capabilities, as well as also just setting my future up to be more safe. I think, if you take the lessons from people who've done it before us, a lot of times they're always talking about investing, getting into investing at a certain age. And when I'm talking about investing, I'm not just talking about, of course, diving into the stock market and whatnot, but rather being really strategic with, long-term investing, retirement and savings and things like that. So I'm really mindful about, increasing my income to be able to invest long-term in the future. And I actually have notes here where a part of my personal vision is to be able to afford to purchase a home in New York City within the next 5 years. I would love to buy a 1 or 2 bedroom condo in New York. That's just personally been a dream of mine. And it's very audacious. It really is. At the same time, I think some of us, when we think of doing certain things that sound so big and almost out of touch, I think the biggest thing that I've done that helped make it more realistic is actually going to look at what the reality would cost per se in this scenario. So if I'm saying, okay, I would love to eventually buy a 1 or 2 bedroom condo just for my sake, just to have for myself, whether it's for part-time or just as my own pad, whatever, right? To me, what I've done then instead is I would look at the market. I would pay attention to prices and HOA and different fees that are involved. And to me, what it does is it makes it more attainable. It doesn't actually scare me. It makes me go, okay, crunch the numbers. These are the range of what it would look like to buy in Manhattan and in this neighborhood versus this neighborhood in Brooklyn, right? And again, I mentioned this earlier too, but like another part of my personal vision is the ability to live between New York and Miami in the future. I think that would be awesome to balance a lifestyle like that. Or, at one point years back, I dreamed of being bi-coastal. And I think for a good part of 2020, I was very bi-coastal. I was between LA and New York every 6 weeks or so. And I think that really got my wheels turning because I'm a creative. I love the jump between 2 major cities, and being at that age at 23, 24, it just made sense to me, I think, to be able to really capitalize on that. And lo and behold, what it did was it made me go, oh shit, there are some people that actually live like this. What does it take to live like that, right? And I want to add another comment too, because I actually said this on a recent podcast, but not everyone is going to have this kind of dream. And that does not take away, like if you want to have a solid home in a more suburban, even rural area. Like I grew up in a very rural hometown. I think that's normal. I think that's fine. And I think that if that is your vision, go in that direction, write that down and crunch the numbers or crunch the reality of what that would look like, what that would take, right? I'm just sharing mine because I think, again, if I give examples of my own personal vision and what's partially included in that and my thought process in making it a reality, I think you can kind of find the parallel of what you could also do in your own life to go from A to B to C. Okay, so jumping into the next part, I would say is very much setting goals, right? So after you start with your personal vision, the next part would be setting goals around it. I know a lot of people, I think, tend to set goals instead of have a vision. And my dad and I actually debated on this, but for me, I think it's hard to set goals if you don't have a vision, because vision gives you direction, right? I think a lot of people oftentimes just feel lost, simply not being sure of where to go. And I have simplified it in my life where I think about direction is as simple as knowing whether you're going to turn right, left, you're going to go north, east, west, wherever. That's how simple I put it in my mind. And so if you don't know what direction you're going in, you really have to start with that, right? I think basic examples is, if you're in college and you're thinking about going to nursing school, right? And you end up realizing, hey, this is the path I want to go on. Then it makes it a lot easier because you've decided, I'm going to go to nursing school. I'm going to become a nurse. These are the years that it'll take. This is the process. Okay, next steps, right? So once you have a direction, you know the next steps to take. So same thing for me, when I left my corporate job, I started my marketing agency, and I knew that the first step was making substantial revenue to feed myself, right? Like being self-employed for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is scary. I was self-employed part-time before, right? And again, I don't even know if that would be a thing, saying you're self-employed part-time, but I had my own businesses, right? But none of which was paying for my rent and all my bills the way my agency has. And so knowing that was the first step, that made the goal a lot easier, because I would be like, okay, let's say, just throwing fake numbers out there, let's say I charge $3,000 per client, right? Okay, so how many clients would it take to reach a safe amount to cover my monthly expenses, right? Does that make sense? And so I think of that in the same way where without vision, it's hard to set goals and next steps. So when it comes to setting goals, make sure that they are measurable, make sure they have a deadline, and lastly, make sure they are specific and relevant to your vision. I noticed that when I was hungry to leave my corporate job, how many years ago? I guess almost 3 years ago. In end of April will be 3 years ago. I remember I was advised to put it on my calendar, and also was forced to, I guess, it wasn't like making a bet, but rather having skin in the game, where if I did not leave the job by April 30th, I owed certain people $500 each. That made it more risky, right? And I loved that because it put me under pressure. It made me go hunt for new clients faster. And what happened was I went from having no clients for, 2-3 months, and then getting 2 clients in 2 weeks, which was, such a fun process to me. And it really showed me how important it is to have a deadline, and to even better, make the deadline shorter than you think it needs to be. And so for me personally, when it comes to my goals for 2024, they are surrounding the trajectory of my career and finances, because like I said, that is my core focuses within my personal vision, right? So what I do, knowing that, okay, let's imagine we're writing this down on a piece of paper, and career/finances is at the top, because that's like the core topic, right? So from there, I break them down into each month and each quarter, my goals. So there'll be like a specific goal for January, February, March, April, etc. And then there is a specific goal for Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And that being said, in January right now, I have a specific goal that I'm targeting in January. I actually shared it with my team member and for Lost Hatton and What Fulfills You. And that specific goal contributes to my Q1 goal. And the reason why I break them down into quarters as well is because, like I said earlier, when it's measurable and has a deadline, right? The deadline is very specific. It gives me a time frame to measure within. So of course, okay, January goal is to be completed by January 30th, right? Okay, Q1 goal is to be completed by March 30th, the end of the quarter. And so then it helps me focus on, okay, what are my top priorities from now through the end of March? And most importantly, okay, let's say I feel lost on setting goals or knowing what goals I need to write down. Okay, well, a question would be, how can I set the bar high enough where the goal is, okay, attainable, very much so, but also high, right? It's going to add some pressure. It's not easy. And what also, most importantly, it moves the needle forward in your personal vision. Or in this case, this is what I'm asking myself. Is this goal moving the needle forward in my personal vision? So I really want to emphasize on starting with a vision for yourself and make it small, okay? Don't talk about the 5-year plan. That's something else I also debate with my dad and a lot of people. I think it is ideal to know where you would love to be in 5 years. But when I think about 5 years ago, I was 22. I was finishing my last semester of college. And of course, I do think that I've certainly gone in the direction that I had started at that time in my life. But a lot of things change over the years, right? I think at that point in my life, I certainly didn't think that I was going to be moving to LA. I certainly didn't think that I would move to New York. I didn't think I would ever move back to the East Coast, to be honest. So you have to kind of accept that there will be things that are not set in stone. But that's why I love rather projecting, okay, what does 26-year-old Emily look like? What does 27-year-old Emily look like, right? Because that's within the next 1 to 2 years, and that does come a lot faster. And I think as you get momentum in thinking about your vision and who you are going to become over the next 1 to 2 years, then it becomes easier to write a potential grand vision or archetype or whatever of who you are 5 years down the road, knowing that there's going to be some change, of course. But I would say my final words on this, on setting intentions, goals, and visions for the new year, especially in the first 3 months. Number one, start with a vision. And particularly in your personal vision, try to find 1, maybe 2 areas in your life that you're really focused on. What part of your life do you know that you need to get your shit together in, right? And I would say a lot of you guys listening, it probably is going to be somewhere within like your career and just getting your whole life together as a whole, right? And but I think oftentimes it really stems from figuring out what you want to do with your life, where it's meaningful, it means something to you, it's enjoyable, and you're, of course, making a living out of it, you know? And I think this is a perfect time, if you are feeling a little bit stuck, to take and dedicate a month or 2 months or however long it takes to really focus on you. And sometimes that does mean giving up a little bit of social time or leisure things that you typically would want to do. But hey, putting that on pause to get other things going faster will help you in the long run. So that is all I have for today's episode on setting intentions, goals, and visions for the new year in 2024. I hope this short episode was helpful for you. And as always, if it was, please be sure to share this on your Instagram story. Tag my personal Instagram at Emily E. Duong and the podcast Instagram at What Fulfills You. And lastly, if you want to hear more personal insights on career building, personal growth, relationships, and everything I talk about on the show, I do have a new weekly email newsletter where I send you guys a weekly email sharing my personal insights on any specific topic relating to the podcast. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. I would chat with you guys in the next episode.